Shalom, shalom, everyone. Today, continuing on with our word studies in Psalm 119, we'll be looking at verse 6 and the words ashamed and once again, let's cover some of the various resources that can be used to do Hebrew research. Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon by Jeff Benner, a King James Bible. I prefer the ISR, Scriptures version of the Bible, the Greek Concordance to the Septuagint by Hatch and Redpath, the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, and the eSword. In addition, the Englishman's Hebrew Concordance, the Englishman's Greek Concordance, the Brown Driver Briggs Jacenius, the Thayer's Greek to English Lexicon, the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, the Etymological Dictionary of the Hebrew Language by Klein, and the Etymological Dictionary by Hirsch. Before we make our way back to Psalm 119, we're going to start the study at 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 15 through 17. For do not let any of you suffer as a murderer, or thief, or doer of evil, or as a meddler. But if, being messianist, let him not be ashamed, but let him esteem Elohim in this matter, because it is time for judgment to begin from the house of Elohim. And if firstly from us, what is the end of those who do not obey the good news of Elohim? So there we see our word ashamed is the Greek 153. Looking at 1 Peter 4, verse 16, we see in the ISR the word is ashamed, and in the KJV the word is ashamed, Greek 153. We can also see when we go to our Strongs, if we look up ashamed in the front of the book, we see that at 1 Peter 4:16, it's 153. Turning to the back of the book and looking the Strong's Greek dictionary, we see that it is disfigurement, that is, disgrace, to feel shame for oneself. Looking up our Greek word in the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, we see our Greek 153, to produce shame, to be ashamed or fear shame from, to disgrace, dishonor, and then we have to feel respect. So here in the back of the polyglot, when we turn to the section that lists the Greek Strong's numbers in numerical order, we find just a representative example here. There are more as you go down the list of all the places that this Greek word is used in the Old Testament, this being a Septuagint, a Greek Old Testament. And we can see there at the top are 153, and at the bottom we see where it goes to Psalm 119, verses 6, 46, 78, and 80. Going back to the Psalms in this Apostolic Bible Polyglot, this is what the verse looks like with its numbers. In the actual physical rendition, you will see the numbers above the words as opposed to the right of them. And there we see at Psalm 119, verse 6, ashamed is our Greek word 153. Now that we've seen that our word goes to Psalm 119, verse 6, in the Scriptures we read it is ashamed, and in the KJV it is also the word ashamed. So we are going to look up the word as it appears in the KJV. In this instance, it just happens to be the same as it is in the Scriptures. So we go to the front of our Strong's Concordance again, and in alphabetical order we find the word ashamed. Under ashamed we look for Psalms, and then we look for 119:6, and we can see the two ticky marks there. And if we look up to where the number above it is, we see that it is the 954. Going to the back of the Strong's, in the Hebrew Chaldee Dictionary, we see that it is bush, a primary root, properly to pale, that is, by implication to be ashamed, also by implication to be disappointed or delayed. And after delayed, we see our colon and our dash, so we know everything after that is just an English translation. Now that we've got our Hebrew number, we can look in the back of the Theological Word Book and see in the back of this resource that the 954 goes to 222. In looking at the 222, it's on page 97. It says, be ashamed, put to shame, disconcerted, disappointed. ASV and RSV normally translate with the above, or in a few instances with confound. Idiomatic usages such as delay and cease are discussed below in this description that they have for this root line. I'm just going to read a couple things out of the root line that I found of interest. The primary meaning of this root is to fall into disgrace, normally through failure, either of self or of an object of trust. Along with its derivatives, it occurs 155 times, all but 25 times in the prophets or the Psalms. No less than 38 occurrences are found in Jeremiah and 20 in Isaiah. The word is often paralleled with kalam, to be humiliated, and less frequently with hatat, to be shattered, dismayed. As these parallels suggest, the force of bush is somewhat in contrast to the primary meaning of the English, to be ashamed, in that the English stresses the inner attitude, the state of mind, while the Hebrew means to come to shame, and stresses the sense of public disgrace, a physical state. Likewise, in Akkadian, the G stem of this root means to come to shame, and the D stem to put to shame. And then there's a discussion of a couple usages of this word. The third usage, and the one that is most common, carries the above thought further, expressing the disgrace which is the result of defeat at the hands of an enemy, either in battle or in some other manner. In particular, the awful shame of being paraded as captives is thought of. Involved here are all the nuances of confusion, disillusionment, humiliation, and brokenness, which the word connotates. The prophets normally use the word with this sense, promising Israel that unless she repents and turns from her idolatrous ways, she will certainly experience the shame of defeat and exile. Intimately associated with this third use of the word is the question of trust. If Israel seeks to ensure her own glory by refusing to trust in Elohim, but rather trust in idols, Isaiah 1:29, or in foreign nations, Isaiah 25 and 33 and 5, she will not get glory, but shame and disgrace. On the other hand, if one will humbly submit to Elohim, he will find his true glory, for Elohim will not let that person come to shame. It is this promise of which the psalmist continually reminds Elohim. And then there's a list of the Psalms here. The final use of bosh is one which coincides most closely with the common English connotation, a feeling of guilt from having done what is wrong. Jeremiah 6:15. Jeremiah is horrified that the people are not ashamed, having committed abomination, idolatry. Similarly, Yehezkel indicates that Elohim's grace, manifested in the restoration, will not allay, but increase Judah's sense of shame. Not until then will she see what a terrible thing it was to trust idols instead of the living Elohim. Ezra, discovering the situation in Yerushalayim, cries out that he is ashamed because our iniquities are higher than our heads. And I thought this other last piece was kind of interesting. Evidently, this sense of horror over idolatry accounts for the transmutation of the names of Saul's sons, Ishbaal, man of Baal, and Mephibaal, utterance of Baal, into Ishbosheth, man of shame, and Mephibosheth, utterance of shame. This substitution of shame for Baal has a further development in the substitution of the vowels of the boshet in other words. Thus, it is probable that Molech, the word for king, Molech, i.e. the divine king, with the substitution of other vowels. Indeed, it may have been pronounced boshet. In the same vein, sikut and kiyun may be vocalized from shikus, abomination. So you get stuff from, basic, I'm going to say storyline in the scriptures to in-depth meaning of these words and their connotations, some things about the cognates they had, and even how names changed throughout time. It's a great resource. So after getting some really good information from the TWOT, the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. We then turn to our Ancient Hebrew Lexicon by Jeff Benner, which I would highly recommend everybody get, along with the book we just looked at. We see that 954 in the back of the book goes to 1044 JV in this reference. We see the 1044 JV, the V at the bottom there is ashamed, and we can see at the very bottom of that we have the 954, so we know we've got the correct Strong's number. Moving up to the J, we see the concrete is genitals and the abstract is shame, a dry and arid desert. Also shame as one who is dried up. At the 1044, we have the two-letter parent root, the bait and the sheen. The action is to wither, the concrete is dry, and the abstract is shame. A drying up of a land, stream, plant, etc. So again, our verse reads, "Then shall I not be ashamed when I have respect unto all thy commandments. Then shall I not be this dried up seed," because from the genitals comes the seed. We're speaking here of the seed that is the word, that is the one who planted the word, the L to the Ta. So I shall not be ashamed as having the seed that has dried up inside of me. Because why? Because I have respect unto all thy commandments. Therefore, I shall not be out of the house, out of the family. I shall not be unsecure, but secure, and pressed to continually respecting or looking to the commandments, and not be destroyed. So we see there's a double-edged sword, a two-sided coin. You're either going to be ashamed and not be in the house and secured to the house and destroyed, or you're going to be in the house and in the family and secured and pressed to those and Yah, because you're looking towards and you're respecting, and we're respecting his commands. So as a reminder, if you're using the books as opposed to the e-sword, I highly recommend learning from the books, learning from the books, learning from the books. It's great to have e-sword there as a backup at first. Very important to get familiar with how to handle all the books. Don't forget to look in the Englishman's Hebrew Concordance for your 954 and your word. And this is, again, is just a representative example of all the places this Hebrew word is used. Because sometimes it's ashamed. Sometimes it's confounded. Sometimes it's other words that we don't even see here on this list, and we're going to miss it if we don't look for this exact Hebrew number, so we can get this exact Hebrew word in every instance. So we see that it says, "I will not be ashamed when I look into all your commands" in the scriptures, when I have respect unto all thy commands in the KJV. So we need to look up the word respect in the Strong's Concordance, being that it's based on the King James. And when we go to the front of the book, alphabetical order, we look for the word respect. At Psalms 119, verse 6, we see that we have two ticky marks at the end. And when we look up the line, we can see that it's Hebrew 5027, nabat, a primitive root, to scan, that is, look intently at, by implication to regard with pleasure, favor, or care. And then we see our colon and our dash, so everything after that is just an English translation. You can see there how many English words this one Hebrew word has been translated into. I want to do something a little different this time. Look at a different resource that we can be looking at. And I use it quite a bit, the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. You can also find it online. Just type in your word and you can get it right there and copy and paste information into your own study. So here's the word regard. That's one of the definitions we saw in the Strong's. To look towards, to point, or to be direct. To observe, to notice with some particularity. To attend to with respect and estimation. To value. To attend to as a thing that affects our interest or happiness, to fix the mind on as a matter of importance, to esteem, to hold in respect and affection, to keep, to observe with religious or solemn attention, to attend to something, to influence our conduct, to consider seriously, to lay to heart. Attention of the mind, respect in relation to something. He has no regard to the interest of society. His motives are wholly selfish. There we see something totally opposite. Lots of times it will give you extra sentences in here. Many times it will give you scripture verses. Respect, esteem, reverence, that the view of the mind which springs from value, estimatable qualities, or anything that excites admiration. So here we see all these differences of regard, which was also looked to. And so just considering the verse, will not be ashamed if we look to and respect his commands. The 1828 Webster's just gives us these beautiful pictures of looking towards, fixing our mind, giving attention to, putting a value on, observing with solemn attention, to consider seriously, to lay these commands. They're supposed to be written on our heart, the Torah, the instructions on our heart. So just some beautiful things come out of the 1828. Again, it's always a good idea to go check the Theological Word Book and see what kind of information it reveals. Here we see the 5027 going to 1282, turning to the 1282. We find it on page 546. There's a couple paragraphs here. It goes down into some combinations with other words, and it just some different things that may be of interest to you. If you have the resource, I would suggest you go look at it. We're not going to cover it here. Switching over to the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon by Benner, we see our 5027 that's listed in the Strong's number in the back of the book in numerical order, goes to 2367V in this book. We can see at the 2367V, it is look. At the 2367, we see the action is look and the abstract is expect. This is an adopted root and something we're going to deal with, a ways down the road. But for now, just looking, respecting, expecting, having expectation in. We can see, from the 1828, we gleaned a lot of information about respecting or looking to the command so that we will not be ashamed as a dried up seed. And don't forget to follow this through to the Englishman's Hebrew Concordance so that you can find some other verses that use the same Hebrew word in context so you can just really get a full grasp on it. Here we see that it's used as looked, beheld, thou shalt see. And so again, if we're just looking for an English word, we're not going to be finding what we need. We need to look for the Hebrew number with the actual Hebrew word. My hope and my prayer is that learning how to do these things, be Bereans and search these things out for ourselves, will cause us to fall more in love with His Word and more in love with His language and simply more in love with Him. Proverbs 2 verses 4 and 5. If you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasure, then you would understand the fear of Yah and find the knowledge of Elohim. Hallelujah.